Relations with my family became even more strained after I decided to take a desperate step and bought my own house, trying to distance myself from the past, which was intertwined with a sense of abandonment and vulnerability. As soon as they found out about it, my family resorted to legal measures, demanding that the house be transferred to my sister Jennifer, as if I wasn't entitled to a drop of what I had hard-earned myself. The trial was long and exhausting, but in the end I won, and they were saddled with a $12,000 debt, and this only increased the gap between us, like a pattern that had been created over the years with cruel and inexorable patience. When I was alone, thinking about this pain, the thought flashed through my head over and over again: do I need someone's advice, or do I just want at least someone to hear what's going on inside? I was trying to figure out the reason for all these complicated entanglements, why I, their daughter, had to defend my right to a house as if I were a stranger. Maybe I'm too sensitive or even moody, but my whole life has developed in such a way that I have always remained on the periphery of the family circle, as an outsider observer. My younger sister Jennifer, 5 years younger than me, was the center of the universe for them, their golden child. Her birth seemed to bring warmth and light into their lives, but it also brought me a feeling of endless cold, which has never left me since. I saw how they loved her with a kind of frenzy, and they saw in her every success and even in the most insignificant pranks a reason for joy. I got the gray everyday life, in which I seemed to dissolve, getting lost in the shadow of her radiance. Each holiday only emphasized this inequality. I remember last Christmas, the whole family gathered, the air was filled with joy and laughter, as if on command. The whole house, from the Christmas tree to the festive dishes on the table, was created to please Jennifer. A brand new PlayStation 5 set was waiting for her under the tree, which I had been dreaming about for a long time, imagining how I would give myself moments of peace, but it remained a dream for me. I was left with only one modest box under the tree, which I recognized even before I opened it, a pair of simple white socks that I bought myself without waiting for the slightest gesture of attention. That day, I had to sit with a strained smile as Jennifer happily unwrapped her many gifts, and I sat in these new socks, struggling to force myself to smile to hide my disappointment. This was no exception. On the contrary, it was in such seemingly small things that my whole life passed. Even my birthday, which, in theory, should have been at least some kind of small holiday for me, remained in their memory only as a date on a calendar, forgotten and dusty. The last time they really celebrated it, I was 10. Since then, it has been just a day, no different from the others. When I turned 25, the only people who celebrated with me were friends from college, with whom I gathered on a quiet evening, somewhere far from everyone. Not a single call, not even congratulations by email from parents, just silence. And Jennifer's birthdays turned into bright events, as if the whole world stopped to share her joy. Last year, when she turned 16, my parents staged a truly luxurious celebration. All family and friends were invited to a luxurious restaurant, a trampoline was even rented, animators and magicians. The house was filled with luxury and light, decorations that seemed as bright as the stars in the night sky. Everything from huge bouquets of flowers to exquisite garlands was organized professionally, as if it was not just a birthday party, but a festival, an invitation to which I was waiting for, like a child waiting for magic. However, they didn't even consider it necessary to call me. I found out by chance that the holiday would take place the day before, when I asked my parents about their plans for the weekend. Their reply, delivered in an even tone, hit me like a whipping wind. They didn't want me to be there at this party. It turned out that I was superfluous at a holiday that, it would seem, was supposed to be a family one. Everything inside me collapsed. Of course, I tried to find resilience in myself, to find solace in the fact that I could distract myself with my studies, and, overloaded with tasks, I decided to go for a walk with friends, trying to forget what was happening at home, but the bitterness still remained. It rolled in like a tide, hardly calming down, even when I was laughing and talking. Somewhere deep inside me there was a feeling that I was not a real part of the family, and this feeling stayed with me every time I returned home. Unbeknownst to myself, I began to hope that maybe this time, as my own birthday approached, everything would change. A small corner of my soul believed that I would finally hear warm congratulations from my loved ones, see at least a symbolic gift, maybe even feel that rare joy when the family gets together for me. But the day came, and, as always, silence surrounded me. My only consolation this time came again from friends from college. They had a small but heartfelt party in the dorm, and although it was fun, although I felt their care and friendly affection, it was not what I dreamed of. I wanted to share my birthday with my family, no matter how modest it was, in order to feel that I was important to them, but everything turned into loneliness again. Jennifer's birthdays have always exposed this painful feeling of absence, showing me how much is missing in my life. I remember when she turned 10, that day remained etched in my memory to the smallest detail. My parents decorated the whole house like on the set of a pirate movie, adding dozens of small details: boats, flags with skulls and bones, gold coins scattered on the tables. It was magic, full of fun, games, gifts, invited children and, of course, happiness that shone in Jennifer's eyes. When I turned 10, my holiday consisted only of a modest pizza box, and I was grateful even for that, warming myself with the hope that maybe next year everything would change. My pain was not in the gifts themselves, not in modesty or lack of fancy jewelry, but in the eternal feeling that I was unimportant, less significant. No matter what I did, no matter how hard I studied, avoiding trouble, trying to meet their expectations, it was never enough. Jennifer, with her friendly nature, athletic success, and the ease with which she attracted people to her, seemed to me an unattainable peak to which my parents put all their strength and care. Her birth was the beginning of a long process, when I began to feel that I was gradually being forgotten. I remember the day she was born as if it were yesterday. My mother and I were returning from the store, and suddenly the birth began. I was too young at the time to realize that it would change my life, and I imagined that we would be best friends, like in the movies. I imagined scenes where we play together, laugh, and support each other. But reality quickly dispelled my hopes. Jennifer chose to play sports with her friends and always sought the center of attention, while I was left behind, forgotten, like an old doll who no longer had a place in the new family life. As I got older, anger, like an invisible shadow, gradually wrapped around me. At first, I tried to justify Jennifer, convincing myself that she was not to blame for how unfairly I was ignored, that it was my parents who did not notice my pain. But the older she got, the clearer it became to her what kind of influence she had, and this knowledge became her weapon. She skillfully played on it, and her parents, as if blind, did not see it. They never blamed her, even when the mistakes were obvious. It was always my fault, even if, as often happened, I wasn't involved in what happened at all. I remember one particularly painful case when Jennifer and her friends decided to have fun in the living room, and as a result of her pranks, the TV ended up on the floor, smashed to pieces. When her parents returned home, they found her at the wreckage, but she did not hesitate for a moment, directed an accusing look at me and confidently declared that I was to blame for everything. And my parents, without asking a single question, believed her. I wasn't even at home at the time, but it didn't matter. I was punished with cruelty, as if I were a criminal. I was not allowed to see my friends for a whole month, my phone was taken away, and I was left with only a wall of my loneliness and disappointment. Since then, I started hiding in my own world, spending long hours alone, hiding from reality in my room or running away to friends to forget about the house that no longer seemed like home to me. I desperately wanted to get out of this cramped space, to leave a place where I was nothing, devalued and invisible. Every time I came back, it reminded me how insignificant I felt. My room was small, cramped, and shabby, a simple bed, faded walls, and an old chair. In this corner, untouched by care, I could only wait. Unlike me, Jennifer had her own little empire, bright and shining. Her room was awash in the latest electronic devices, posters of her favorite sports teams hung everywhere, trophies were displayed next to the bed, which her parents proudly displayed, as if it were an altar of her success. With every step I took around the house, I felt more and more like a shadow whose existence didn't matter. Her space was full of life. She rang with joy, laughter, and new friends, while my corner was drowned in gray silence. My 18th birthday, which was supposed to be an important milestone, was unforgettable, but not at all in the way I had hoped. I was waiting for something, maybe not even gifts, but at least a simple recognition that this was my day, the day when I reached an age that seemed to mean something. I woke up in the morning feeling nervous, but the day started like everyone else. My mother was engrossed in her kitchen, my father was intently reading the newspaper, lost in his thoughts, and Jennifer was cheerfully sitting on the couch, enthusiastically playing on her new Xbox, which, as I later learned, was given to her for no reason. No one even looked in my direction, did not say a single word to me, and I, standing aside, realized the absurdity and cruelty of this indifference. Then I realized that nothing would change. All the attention and all the love that seemed like it could be directed at both of us went to Jennifer alone, as if she had absorbed everything our parents had to offer, leaving me with nothing. She took everything away as if it were her privilege, and although I'm not sure if she fully understood what she was doing, her actions clearly showed that it wasn't a problem for her. Since then, I couldn't hide my hatred for her. I took the necessary measures, distancing myself from my parents and starting to build my own life with the hope of getting rid of the inner emptiness that had oppressed me for decades because of the endless favoritism they showered on Jennifer. As soon as the opportunity arose, I left my parents' house and moved to live with friends from the university, feeling as if a heavy burden had been lifted from my shoulders. For the first time in a long time, I felt free. It was as if the chains that bound my heart began to loosen, and I was finally able to take a deep breath. But, of course, freedom required payment, and soon I realized that I needed to take care of my own future. Trying to provide for myself, I took up freelance, turning to my graphic design skills, which previously seemed to me only a hobby, but now have become a real means of livelihood. At first it was just a small part-time job that helped pay for housing and basic necessities, but over time my projects became more serious. Clients left positive feedback, and soon I began to receive invitations to participate in larger projects. I worked tirelessly, late into the night, on weekends, putting all my time and effort into building my career and achieving success that would be exclusively mine, without a shadow of influence or family support. So, at the age of 24, I got a chance that changed my life. I met David, a man who at first sight embodied everything I was looking for in a partner. He was smart, ambitious, and had a surprisingly generous heart. Like me, David was a freelancer and successfully managed social media for small and medium-sized businesses. A special bond immediately arose between us, which seemed to be embedded in the stars themselves. We quickly realized that we could not only work together, but also support each other in this difficult world. Starting with joint projects, we gradually built a partnership in which we sincerely cared for each other and inspired each other to new heights. David became for me the person with whom I felt for the first time that I was not just a background, not a shadow, lost in the environment of others. He saw me for who I am, loved me not for achievements or profitable deeds, but for who I was in my simplest and most real manifestations. His concern was sincere, devoid of any obligation, and this was strikingly new to me. For the first time, I felt in my place, next to someone who understood me like no one else. As our careers stabilized and gained confidence, we began to dream of a future in which we could combine not only our efforts, but also our lives. A year after we met, we decided to take an important step. We moved in together, with joy and trepidation, waiting for what lies ahead. Life was going smoothly, and we, full of enthusiasm, decided to set ourselves a bolder goal, to invest the accumulated funds in buying a house that would become our common fortress, a symbol of our new beginning. We understood that the house should be not just a place to live, but something special, embodying our dreams and our efforts. For several months we spent weekends searching, studied dozens of offers, until finally we came across a 3-story house in the suburbs, which immediately won our hearts. It turned out to be more expensive than we expected, but we managed to pay for it thanks to our combined income and perseverance. On the day we signed the contract and became the official owners 3 days later, we felt incredible happiness and satisfaction standing in the silence of our new home. It was a moment that seemed incredible, as if all those years of hard work and endless nights spent working had finally made sense. The real problems started shortly after our housewarming, when the phone rang 3 days later. My parents' number flashed on the screen, and I froze in indecision. We hadn't spoken much since I'd left home, and every conversation was steeped in a strained awkwardness that I was desperately trying to avoid. But the calls didn't stop, persistently breaking through my resolve not to answer. In the end, I picked up the phone, although deep down I already felt an uneasy premonition. The parents, with a note of complacency in their voice, informed us that they were in the city and wanted to stop by our new house to congratulate us on the purchase. Too stunned by the unexpected turn of events, I lost the ability to speak for a moment, but then I nodded, even though they didn't see it. I agreed, convincing myself that it was better to just endure the visit than to shy away from it and feel the pressure of uncertainty. This decision soon seemed to me a fatal mistake, but it was too late to give up now. A few hours later, my parents, Jennifer, and a stranger with a sullen face were standing at the entrance to our house. The man, tall and arrogant, was holding my sister's hand with an air as if he already owned everything that could appear before his eyes. By this point, I had already guessed that this particular man, whose name I still did not know, was the mysterious fiancé of Jennifer. Unbeknownst to me, my sister had already become engaged, and besides, as it became clear to me from the slight rounding of her figure, she was expecting a child. And not a single family member thought it necessary to tell me about it. As soon as I invited them in, the atmosphere instantly became tense. My father looked around the living room and said with a sarcastic note, "Well, so that's where you live now. Who would have thought that you could afford something like that?" His tone was a mixture of disdain and bewilderment, and I read disbelief in his gaze, as if buying this house was something unimaginably arrogant on my part for him. I wanted to brush it off, but I felt the resentment coming up, threatening to break out. I forced myself to remain silent, hoping that the meeting would not be delayed and would end faster. When they settled down in the living room, the atmosphere finally heated up. Mom, trying to be kind, turned to David with questions, obviously trying to fill the awkward silence, but he immediately sensed something was wrong, turned to me with a quiet but worried question in his eyes. At this time, Jennifer and her father were whispering something, and Isaac, her fiancé, was looking around the rooms with undisguised interest, as if mentally trying them on himself. Suddenly, the father, clearly determined, broke the silence, abruptly, as if preparing for a long overdue statement. "I think it would be wise if Jennifer and Isaac moved here to build their family, to make room for the child." He said it with such unquestionable confidence that I felt uneasy. His voice, calm but filled with a sense of superiority, permeated every word. I stood there, stunned by his words, not even immediately realizing what he had just suggested. "This place is too big for you and David," he continued, as if justifying his decision. "Jennifer and Isaac really need such a space to raise a child, and you two don't need all this." I looked at him, unable to believe that he could so openly demand that we give them the house, our house, for the sake of someone, in his opinion, more weighty needs. I couldn't believe my ears when my father, looking me straight in the eye, repeated his words, as if checking if I dared to contradict his will. He said it with a cold contempt that aroused unbearable indignation in me. "This is not a joke, it's time for you to step aside," he said. "You have to give up what your sister needs. Family should come first, and Jennifer is creating a new family. You and David will find a smaller place. This house is much more suitable for them." His words devastated me. A feeling of horror and anger hit me like a wave washing away the last remnants of restraint. It was our house, bought by us, built on our efforts and hopes, a house that we paid for and registered in our names. No one had the right to decide what to do with it, much less claim it. But as soon as I tried to object, Jennifer intervened, her smug face expressing a complete misunderstanding of my feelings. "Wait a minute," she said with a flippant tone. "I don't understand why you need such a big place. Unlike you, we have a child." Her words, spoken so casually, as if my life had no meaning, blew me up from the inside. All the anger, all the years when I silently endured humiliation and neglect, suddenly burst into flames. I couldn't help myself. "That's not the problem, Jennifer," I shouted, feeling my voice crack with indignation. "The problem is that you think you can claim that mine belongs to you, and you shamelessly try to take it away. I've been putting up with this for too long, and I'm not going to be silent anymore." The father jumped up, and his face was distorted with anger. He came closer, his chest heaving, and his voice was full of arrogance and contempt. "You should be grateful," he said coldly. "It's a shame to live in a house that you can't afford. But if you give it to Jennifer, she won't have to go through such difficulties. They don't demand the keys, they just ask. Whether you like it or not, this house will become Jennifer's property. It's inevitable." Something exploded inside me. These words, uttered so casually, without a single drop of respect or understanding, interrupted years of accumulated pain. I rushed to my father, choking with anger, pinning him against the wall. "Get out of this house right now," I screamed, unable to hold back any longer. David tried to intervene, begging us to calm down, but I was unable to stop. All these years of suppressed anger burst out like a natural disaster, destroying my last remaining powers of restraint. My father pushed me away, and we, without realizing it, went into a fierce fight, exchanging harsh words that hurt my chest. His mother and Jennifer were screaming, and Isaac took out his phone in a panic and, holding it to his ear, was talking hotly, trying to avoid my gaze. I didn't realize how much time had passed, how long this fight had lasted, until suddenly the police entered the room, tearing us apart. Handcuffs were fastened around my wrists, and I, along with my father, were taken to a police car, as if the last remnants of my family had shattered into pieces at this senseless moment. I never could have imagined that things would go this far. Even in my darkest thoughts, I could not believe that my own father, with whom we were supposed to be connected by blood and love, would so unceremoniously try to take away my house, which had become a symbol of my independence and freedom. But here I was in prison, behind bars, broken and weakened. After a few agonizing hours, David paid my bail, but the damage to my soul was already irreparable. The family, which was already teetering on the brink of destruction, has now collapsed completely and irrevocably. And, as it turned out later, this was just the beginning. My father did not stop at humiliating me physically and mentally. With some sophisticated cunning, he decided to go further, sued and demanded that I hand over the house to Jennifer and her husband Isaac. His statement said that a young family needs this house more than I do, single and childless. When I was informed of his intention, I was shocked to the core. What should have been a symbol of my success and independence became an occasion for an open battle. Having no other choice, I also filed a lawsuit, preparing for the most decisive battle of my life. I hired a lawyer and carefully collected all the documents that confirmed my ownership of the house. But I had to do more than that. I decided it was time to reveal the truth, all the pain that I had been carrying for so long. Years of emotional neglect and psychological abuse by parents had to come out. After collecting evidence, old emails, text messages, and witness statements from friends who saw the attitude towards me, I decided to bring it all to court. My lawyer didn't just provide evidence that the house belonged to me, he also insisted that I was the victim of years of emotional abuse. The father tried to pretend to be a caring, loving parent, talking about how he always tried for the family, and Jennifer and Isaac did their best to portray victims in need of help. They begged the court for mercy, accused me of selfishness, claiming that I was cruelly hindering their happiness and depriving them of the opportunity to provide a decent future for their unborn child. Their words pierced me like poisons, causing old pain and awakening memories of years of injustice. The trial dragged on for several long, grueling months, and I saw my father resort to the lowest tricks to defame me, to make me look like a petty and ungrateful daughter who everything is not enough. His lawyers built up stories that led away from the truth, accused me of greed, and even hinted that I must have been lying about the house. But my lawyers strongly denounced their lies, exposing the real picture of my childhood, complete neglect and emotional pressure. The testimony of my friends, who have been watching this for years, supported me, confirming that I was the one who endured humiliation and manipulation. Finally, the day came when the judge made his final decision. His words in the audience were a release for me. The court not only recognized the house as mine by right, but also ordered my father to pay $120,000 in compensation for the moral and psychological abuse that I suffered over the years. This moment was a real triumph for me. For the first time in my life, I didn't have to fight alone. For the first time, someone stood up for my rights, against the unfair world in which I lived. I decided to completely cut off all ties with my parents and Jennifer. I could no longer tolerate their manipulations, lies, and the suffocating favoritism that they so shamelessly flaunted, as if it was natural to exclude one child for the sake of exalting another. Now that the litigation is over, David and I have embarked on our new beginning, trying to fill the house with love and warmth, which I have always lacked so much. We made this place truly ours, arranging every corner with the care and trepidation with which we wanted to create new memories. But even when everything finally seemed calm, the past reminded of itself with scars that would not disappear so easily. Unexpectedly for me, Jennifer, who was once their golden child, a favorite, on whom all hopes were pinned, turned out to be deprived of the support that they gave her beyond measure. Now that about 3 years have passed, a lot has changed in my life, but the trail of memories of their toxicity and selfishness sometimes still poisons my mind. Time has passed, and now, remembering those events, I want to tell you about our wedding, which took place 3 years ago, shortly after the judicial victory. This was the happiest day of my life, and I finally made the best decision I've ever made to marry David. After all that he has been through, he has remained my reliable support, faithful friend, and loving companion. After this court nightmare, he became the only person for me whom I could trust implicitly, and I did not want anything to overshadow our day. We had a small, almost intimate ceremony, inviting only David's closest friends and relatives. I didn't even think about calling my family. Their manipulations, abuses, everything that I went through because of them were too fresh and painful for me. I was fully aware of who they really were, and I wasn't going to let their toxicity ruin a day that was the beginning of a new life for me. But a few days after the wedding, I received a letter from my mother, a long one, full of reproaches and reproaches. It was written in that recognizable, manipulative tone that I'd been used to since childhood. In it, she told how painful it was for her not to attend the wedding, how she dreamed of seeing her eldest daughter walk down the aisle, and even how hard it was for her without me on this special day. I was overcome by a strange feeling of either anger or alienation. How she found out about the wedding was unknown to me, but it no longer mattered. Fortunately, my father did not try to contact me, and his silence was a relief to me. Jennifer, in turn, lost her composure, as if she had lost her usual shield, which was the approval of her parents. It was predictable, because she had always been their golden child, who did not need to be responsible for her actions. There had always been someone in her life she could blame for her mistakes, someone who would back her up, and now that security had become shaky. The court's financial decision cost my parents $120,000. This did not lead them to bankruptcy, but deprived them of the freedom and flexibility that they have always so proudly demonstrated. Jennifer found it difficult to cope with this new reality. She, who was used to having all the resources of the family at her disposal, was now faced with limitations that, perhaps for the first time in her life, reminded her that even for her, everything has its limits. She believed that she had every right to inherit her father's house, but her claims collapsed as quickly as the plan itself. Her demands for a large sum of money were just the beginning of a series of her frustrations. Her fiancé Isaac, unable to withstand the pressure after the trial, left her a few months later, blaming her for all the misfortunes that had befallen them. My sister was left alone, hurt and confused, especially after she suffered a miscarriage. As they said, the cause was extreme stress. Her sadness, anger, and pain seemed directed at me, and it seemed that the whole sequence of these events in their eyes was a direct consequence of my actions. After the trial, my life changed completely. Together with David, we were building our future free from family toxicity. We enjoyed this new life, enjoyed its simple joys, and made our home more cozy and warmer. A month after our wedding, when David and I had finally settled in, we decided to take a walk around our new neighborhood. It was especially quiet that day, and we walked enjoying the fresh air and the light breeze, which seemed to bring with it a sense of peace and tranquility. It was an ordinary day when nothing foreshadowed trouble. We had walked about half a block when we saw Jennifer. She was standing on the corner, her figure seemed painfully thin, and her face was gloomy. She looked at me with such fury that my heart stopped, seized with excitement and fear. I hadn't seen her since the trial and had no idea why she had suddenly appeared here, as if she had been waiting for us on purpose. Confused, almost instinctively, I shouted, "What are you doing here?" But before I could figure out the situation, Jennifer rushed towards me. In her hand was an iron rod, probably taken from some construction site nearby. I instinctively screamed and tried to back away, but she was too close. Her eyes burned with unspeakable hatred, and before I could raise my hands, she quickly swung the rod and hit me in the stomach. A sharp pain shot through me, spreading like fire through my ribs, as if a red-hot coal had been lit inside me. I doubled over, gasping, but Jennifer didn't stop. She swung the rod again, aiming now at my legs, and the blow landed on my left shin, which made a dull, sickening sound. I collapsed onto the cold sidewalk, feeling as if everything around me was starting to lose clarity due to the pain. "You ruined my life," Jennifer screamed, her voice shaking with anger and despair. "It's all your fault. You robbed my father of his means, you robbed me of my future, it's your fault that Isaac left me." I tried to get up, to defend myself, but my body would not obey me. The pain, like a paralyzing wave, bound my muscles, making every movement a torture. I didn't know how much time had passed while I was lying there, but gradually voices began to reach my consciousness, which became louder. In the distance, I could hear people shouting, footsteps hurrying towards me. Out of the corner of my mind, I caught someone grabbing Jennifer and dragging her away, but my willpower was leaving me, and everything that was happening around me began to blur in the dark. When I opened my eyes again, I was lying in a hospital bed. The first thing I saw was David's face, sitting next to me. His pale face reflected depression and fear, and there were tears in his eyes. I tried to say something, but my throat was dry, and every attempt to move was accompanied by pain piercing my body like red-hot needles. David, seeing my attempts, leaned towards me and whispered. His hand gripped mine tightly, as if his touch could take away all the pain that was tormenting me. "I'm fine," I managed, even though I knew it was far from the truth. The doctor told me that I had several broken ribs, my left leg and right arm were in a cast. He also said that I was incredibly lucky to be alive. If passers-by hadn't intervened, if they hadn't been able to stop Jennifer, she could have killed me. The police arrived on time, and she was detained right at the scene, handcuffed at the wrists, while I lay bleeding on the cold sidewalk. Painkillers took me into a state of oblivion, and sometimes reality was just a hazy memory. My mind wandered in this strange space, but all the time David stayed by my side, did not leave me for a moment. He took care of everything. He drew up insurance documents, interacted with the police and hired a lawyer for the upcoming trial, which was now inevitable. Jennifer was charged with serious assault with a weapon, and given the severity of my injuries, she was facing a long prison term. David told me all this when I was already conscious enough to understand the full extent of what had happened. After Isaac's departure and a series of legal setbacks, Jennifer, as David explained to me, suffered a serious mental breakdown. She sank into a deep depression, and according to police reports, she was never able to admit her own mistakes. Instead, she desperately searched for the culprit and chose me, attributing all her misfortunes to me. When I heard that Jennifer had been waiting for me outside the house for hours, hiding an iron rod, my stomach turned cold. She had thought of everything in advance. She had brought a weapon with her and was ready to hurt me. But what struck me most was her words during the interrogation. When questioned by the police, Jennifer did not even try to justify herself. On the contrary, she stated with grim satisfaction that she did not regret her actions. She claimed that I had ruined her life and that she was doing her best to restore justice. Her words and her composure struck me to the core, reminding me that all the years of her accusations, manipulations, and anger were not at all outbursts of childish jealousy, but something deeper, poisonous, and inexorable. She sincerely believed that I was the source of all the troubles that had befallen her life. In her opinion, I was to blame for the fact that her fiancé left her, that our father was facing financial difficulties. This irrational belief seemed to be almost her only consolation. While I was in the hospital recovering from multiple fractures, physical pain was intertwined with a feeling of mental emptiness and fatigue from everything I had experienced. Every day was filled with painful physical therapy, endless medical procedures, and the painful realization that a trial awaits me, where I will once again have to face the one who was once my sister. I was discharged a few weeks later, but I could still barely walk. At first, I needed crutches, and sometimes the support of David, who, as always, was there, encouraging and helping in moments of despair. The doctors warned that my recovery could take months, and even hinted that I might no longer regain my former mobility. This news was hard for me, and I accepted it bitterly, trying to hold on to the remnants of strength that still remained in me. Finally, the day of Jennifer's trial came. She never pleaded guilty, adhering to the strange belief that her actions were absolutely justified, that I deserved to be punished for what she thought had ruined her life. In her distorted perception, she saw me as the cause of all her misfortunes, believing that it was I who brought down on her the chain of events that led to her breakdown. At trial, her defense tried to present her actions as the result of family turmoil, allegedly destabilizing her psyche. However, the evidence provided by the prosecution spoke for itself. Eyewitnesses described in detail the moment of the attack, and they all unanimously confirmed that Jennifer was motivated by the intention to harm me. Police reports, medical reports, photographs of my injuries, and recordings from the scene all strongly testified to her guilt. It was clear that she had come to me with a definite plan, that the attack was deliberate and not accidental. Sitting in the courtroom, watching my sister, the person with whom I was connected as a child, try to justify her actions, I felt pain deeper, more excruciating than physical. She was sitting in front of me, but her face didn't seem to have any emotion. Her gaze was cold and empty. Jennifer did not look up, did not look in my direction once, as if I had ceased to exist for her. She was sitting with her back turned, immersed in her accusations and excuses, and at that moment it became clear to me that for her I was just an obstacle in the way, whose disappearance she would have met without a shadow of regret. But perhaps the most painful moment was that my parents were not just present in the courtroom, they were sitting next to Jennifer, their bodies like props supporting her morally, and their looks full of confidence approved of her every word. How many times, when I raised my head in her direction, I met these nods, quiet, approving, like mute blows, each of which was like a knife plunging into my chest. When Jennifer claimed without blinking that I had ruined her life, my parents did not hesitate to confirm their devotion to her. It was like the final touch to a long picture of betrayal that dragged on through the years. Despite everything, they stood by her side, as if nothing could shake their belief that she was an innocent victim. Neither the evidence, nor the witnesses, nor the pain that was evident and palpable in my injuries, changed their devotion. For them, Jennifer has always remained their golden child, whom, in their opinion, I somehow betrayed and ruined. The trial lasted several weeks, but the atmosphere in the courtroom and the strong evidence made the verdict almost inevitable from the very beginning. Jennifer was eventually found guilty of assault with a weapon, and she was sentenced to 5 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 3 years. When the judge announced this verdict, I felt not so much satisfaction as devastation. 3 years, 5 years, all this has become unimportant for me. At that moment, I realized that I had lost my family completely, forever. Those who should have been my family by right turned out to be strangers, for whom my suffering meant nothing. And yet, against the backdrop of this breakup and pain, there was one person who became everything to me, David. His steadfastness, dedication, and unwavering support have become my anchor in this stormy sea of trials. He met every challenge with unflappable determination and was there for me when I was broken, not letting me drown in despair. David and I decided to put the past behind us and focus on moving forward. My physical and moral wounds gradually began to heal, and at the same time, step by step, I began to see a future, albeit not serene, but filled with clarity and meaning. I continued therapy, overcoming step by step the trauma that these events had left in my soul. It was a long and slow process, sometimes seemingly endless, but every day brought its own small victories. There were days when I could get to my feet without pain, or look in the mirror without fear of seeing traces of past suffering there. I was no longer the woman I once knew. All the trials and betrayals, all the pain and struggle transformed me, making me stronger and firmer. I couldn't predict what the future held for me, but one thing I knew for sure: from now on, I would appreciate every day as it is, without expecting too much, without clinging to illusions. And now, at least, I clearly understood who I could really trust.